Like I keep saying, this kid would not exist without the childcare program. I would not be having a second kid because we did our budget and we were looking at it at how much daycare would cost. Our original cost for an infant spot was about $2,300 a month, and so we were looking at that and going, oh.
We basically force people into the choice of having fewer children than they would like because of the housing crisis.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffat.
And today we're talking about the finances of having children.
But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We would love to hear from you.
Some personal news, as they say. I'm having a second kid, and this isn't a sign-off. I'm here at least until the end of the year, but I thought it would make a good time to talk about the finances and the economics that went into my mind as I was thinking about whether to have another kid. So let's start there, Mike. I guess for me, the first thing that came to mind was housing. How big of a consideration was that for you?
So, Team Generation X here, it really wasn't at all for us. Now, we had some special circumstances that we were living in London, Ontario at the time before home prices absolutely exploded. But we bought our first home, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that we bought our first home in 2004, $168,000 for a single detached 3-bedroom home. And we didn't have our first child till years afterwards. So like we had a 3-bedroom home that two of us, were living in. We had a bedroom and kind of his and her home offices. So, really what we had to do at that point, once baby was coming along the way, is basically fight over, who gets the office, whose office gets turned into a nursery.
Who
So
won?
really, I think I ended up moving to the basement, which was quite okay because all my toys were there. But this was, this was Generation X type problems. Sort of looking back on it, we were incredibly blessed. I don't think too many people in our situation or today have the situation we had. So I'm guessing your experience was a whole lot different than ours.
Oh, yeah, for sure. When we had our first kid, we were living in a one-bedroom apartment. And when I found out I was pregnant, I thought, okay, I kind of would like to have another bedroom for this kid. Our apartment was big enough that we tried to come up with ways that, like, what if we had a curtain here? Or if we put up like a temporary wall, could we make sort of a baby nook area? But at the same time, we decided that because prices had dropped during COVID, we'd moved into a 2-bedroom. But that meant our prices went up something like 70% or so, because we were in a rent-controlled apartment that then moved into one that was also rent-controlled, but obviously you pay market prices when you switch apartments. So that was a huge increase. Like it was so much. And even now, when I think about like that same unit's now going for another 50% higher. I think I got in for around, I think it was 22, 25 when I moved in, and now it's for sure over 3,000. The home that I'm in now, it's a 2-bedroom and it has a second bedroom it's small, but it's fine. My kid lives in there, and it's on like a different floor than mine, which is kind of interesting. But it works fine. And so my thought is, at least with the second kid, it makes it easier where they're just going to share a room. And I know a lot of people are like, what, I want my kids to have their own room, and that's how we grew up. But also, I mean, I have 4 siblings, so I almost never had my own room growing up anyway. So it was like, it's fine. But it's a very, like, I don't know, it's daunting. I know that like my first kid is a girl, the next kid is a boy. So eventually they'll probably want to have their own room. So it's like, that's a huge thing when I think about like, okay, either we'll need to move or one of them could live in the basement, but not when they're young. Cause like, that seems weird to me to have a kid 2 floors away from me, even though it's lucky that we do have a basement that's partially finished that they can live in. But it's something to think about when I'm like, okay, do we want to spend a few $100,000 to extend the house, to add more room, or to move somewhere else where we have more room? It's actually like, it's a huge expense. Like I'm sure you didn't have to think about a few $100,000 being the difference between it, right?
Yeah, no, it wasn't an issue for us at all. Again, it was just a loss of a home office. We eventually did end up moving, but that was just because we wanted to be in a more walkable neighborhood with a bigger backyard. So Yeah, it's so tough for your generation, and you know, in some ways, you know, it is kind of a return to almost like the 1950s, because you know, you say that you know, you didn't grow up with your own bedroom, and you know, back in the days where you know people were having four, five, six kids, you know, that was pretty normal. It does feel like that we're going back to that. That unless somebody is having one child, or you know, living somewhere where home prices are more reasonable, that you know, you are having to make these decisions. You are having to double up, or and we see this in the data, just people having only one child and stopping there.
I wonder about that because I know a lot more people are having one child compared to what they used to. And there is like a lot, I'm sure there's a lot of factors that go into it, but I bet housing's a big one because, like, yes, they can share a room and I think it'll be lovely. And I think that that's like a nice experience for them. And it's a privilege to have a house where we can have the potential to maybe expand it, or that we do have the option of putting one in the basement. But at the same time, I can see a lot of people being like, that's not the ideal of what I want to raise my kid. I hear people say it all the time. Like they live in a 2 bedroom condo. They're like, it's a little tight. It would be fine. And I think if people want to have more kids, having more space is something that they're absolutely considering. And it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, it really does, and I think one of the other factors is that because people are getting into homes later, that just reduces the amount of time you have to have kids. Like I can tell you, you know, the number of friends that I had who you know, had their first child, you know, just right out of university. That almost never happens anymore, where you see people at 23, 24 having kids. You know, now it's, you know, strange to me to see, you know, some of my friends in their late 40s are now becoming grandparents, but you know, it's just really changed. So absolutely, I think that lack of space, and also just how much later people are getting their first family size home is
Mm.
absolutely shrinking you know, family size.
I think that there's a lot of people who have said, like, why don't you just start small? You don't need to buy your forever home on your first one. And it's not realistic. You know, people say to me all the time, I bought my first place. It was a little tiny place and you move up the ladder. And I think, well, if you don't get your first home until your 30s, you don't have a lot of time to move up the ladder before you have kids based like on your biological clock. Like you don't really have a ton of time depending on how many kids you want. And so it's really hard to do. And then you add in things like the land transfer tax cost. I'm like, there's really a lot of disincentive to moving up slowly. And so I see why a lot of people hope to get their first home as their forever home. And it's a really difficult thing to do, obviously.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because you're absolutely right. People don't you don't have time to kind of move up that ladder, and you know, furthermore, by the time you do, then people are yelling at you. You know, you greedy senior, you should be downsizing. So, yeah, it's so tough, and I think people who, you know, Gen X and Boomers who say, well, it doesn't you know, my first home was small, they're usually talking about you know, 1,000 square foot duplex, right? They're not
I know
talking
my place is less than 1,000 square feet, and I think about that where I'm like, this is my forever home. I love it. I'm so happy here. I always think about how this is someone's first starter home for sure. For sure it is, and it used to absolutely be that.
Yeah, like they, you know, the people who say that go, you know, well, you know, we started raising kids in our starter home. Their starter home was not a 500 square foot condo. You know, we should just be clear about that.
For sure. I know that one spot though where it was probably harder for you was childcare. What was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, that was more challenging, and that wasn't so much a cost issue, though it is quite expensive. It was just sort of an availability issue. You know, long waits, and you get these, you know, sort of Facebook groups, you know, mommies and daddies talking to each other. I was, you know, in a bunch of them. You know, talking about, oh, you know, this provider's good, that provider's good. Oh, my kid is here. So we ended up um, going to an in-home daycare that some of our friends, their son was enrolled in, and we enrolled our kid, and it was, yeah, it was, we had an absolutely fantastic provider. It was not cheap, but it was such a good place for our daughter. And obviously, this was all well before the $10 a day program. This is your second, so have you been able to take advantage of these lower costs?
Oh yeah, it's been a huge difference in my life. Like I keep saying, this kid would not exist without the childcare program. I would not be having a second kid because we did our budget and we were looking at it at how much daycare would cost. Our original cost for an infant spot was about 2,300 a month, and so we were looking at that and going, oh. I don't know how we can. We definitely will make it work for one because we definitely want to have a kid. But then we were like, there's no way that we can make that work for two. And everyone kept saying, well, just wait till they're in toddler care or preschool, it'll drop. And I'm like, yeah, to like 1,700 a month. And you still multiply that. I think about our poor producer, Meredith Martin, who has twins. And she had to find spots for two of them and pay double the cost at once. And I'm like, I don't even know how people did that. Like, it seems impossible. And it seems like a bit, I mean, it seems like the most giant disincentive you could have to have children. I'm really grateful that like when I actually sent my kid to daycare, we had already dropped it to, I think it was around 50% lower at that time. It was about $1,000 a month. I think they had aimed for 50% across the board on average lower. So it was actually a bit better than that for us. Now it's like under 600 a month for the toddler care. And that's like, it made a huge difference because, you know, the idea of putting two kids in daycare for less than the cost that we were expecting to put one of them in there, like it's huge. And once it goes down even further, like that'll make even bigger difference. Of course, there's the problem of availability and the instability of the program. So it's like there's not a lot of spots out there, and everyone wants them because before you used to have people like what you said do home care as an option, and that was often the cheaper option. And now it's a lot more expensive because most of them they're not covered under the childcare program. Some of them are, but it's really difficult to become accredited. And I understand that a lot of providers have made that judgment and went that doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of people who end up having to do that because the availability of the discounted childcare is like, it's really tough. What I've learned is that you really need to follow up with the people. They give you wait lists that are like several years long, but are full of people who actually don't need a spot anymore or have ready, you're on, they're on 20 wait lists. So it's not like a real thing, but also people jump the wait list when they just keep calling them. And it's not really a fair system. And then there's the instability of it where I hear about some daycare centers that have signed up for it. The parents are paying, $600, $700 a month. And then they say, you know what, we realize the math doesn't work out for us this year. We're going to opt out. And those parents have to now all of a sudden pay 2.5 times that. And that's really scary. Like, I don't know how people do that. So, not knowing whether people are going to be able to stay in the program and whether the next government is going to change the program in a way that makes it more difficult for people to stay in, we don't know. It's really daunting because I can't imagine my bill going up like from 600 to closer to 2,000 per kid.
Yeah, which was closer to what ours was, but I can't complain because we were paying our mortgage with the change we found between the couch cushions. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm not going to explain to millennials and Gen Z how tough Gen X had it. But yeah, I mean, our expenses on childcare were quite a bit higher. There was sort of a lot to negotiate, and I do worry about what this means for those in-home providers. Again, ours was absolutely fantastic. She's was basically an aunt to the kids, like an auntie to the kids. And they still kind of think of her
Oh,
that way. So we had such a great experience, and you do worry that those places will go out of business. But outside of housing and daycare, like how do you anticipate having a second child? What do you anticipate it will do to your finances?
I think the biggest thing is loss of income. The year that you're off on mat leave or parental leave, whoever's taking it. Like I look at it and I think, okay, well, I'm gonna get the whatever EI is, so it's around $2,000 a month, and my salary is more than that, so it's a big cut for sure. And I think a lot of people experience that. It's 55% of your income up to about, I think it's about 60,000. So the most you can get is around 24,000. And so that's like, I mean, my mortgage is more than $24,000 a year. So I'm lucky that, of course, having a partner that is able to work, and that's a really helpful, of course. And the two of us will make it work. But we know that we're going to be dipping into our savings next year because it's really difficult with the high cost of living. And I keep thinking about whether there's a better way for the government to be doing it. like right now they kind of divide it between like maternity leave and parental leave, and I think about how the first 4 months are considered maternity leave that are only taken by the person who gives birth. So I don't think if you adopt, I don't think it applies. I think it's just if you give birth you can take those 4 months, and that doesn't really feel like a luxury. Those first 4 months are really difficult. It's hard on your body. It's having had that experience. I know how difficult it was, how sleep deprived you are trying to get your kid to like learn what time is night and what time is morning. It's really hard. So I wonder if there's a way that like the government could, make it easier for people to take those first few months. But I guess it depends on whether they actually are wanting people to have kids. And I don't know. Is like, do you think that's one of their priorities? Given that like we talk about all the time about the need to increase our population, we do it through immigration, but would the government want people to have kids?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, they would prefer people have kids, but what are they actually willing to do about it? You look at government budgets and how much, particularly the increase in the budget, goes to people who are not either about to have kids or in that age cohort. The big increases in government spending are on things like old age security. They are on healthcare, but again, they're more focused on healthcare for seniors, which is understandable. We have an aging population; the baby boomers are getting older, and so on. But it does feel like that things have been squeezed out. There really isn't that much there to support people having more kids, and governments have tried. Obviously, we had the federal government revamped the child benefit system back in 2015. We do have this daycare system, but if you look at the overall increase in amount of dollars spent, it's only a small fraction relative to what goes into other programs. So, and I think that's a problem. I do think we should be um, encourage, or at least giving families the option, right? Like, where I come from, this is not so much that we should encourage or discourage people from having children, but I think we basically force people into the choice of having fewer children than they would like because of the housing crisis, because of how we've structured different programs like parental leave and so on. So I do think if we had government programs that were more balanced across the generations, and I think if we had governments that were serious about the housing crisis, we probably would see birth rates go up or at least stop going down.
I wondered if they wanted to have people who are here have kids, because obviously raising a kid is there's a big government investment in schooling and all that, versus if you can have the population grow from people who are taught abroad and then come here and they don't really have to have the same level of support. Is that more appealing for a government?
Yeah, I really don't think governments think about it in those terms. That it's like, okay, one or the other. I think, on the sort of immigration piece, I think it's more just thinking through immediate labor market needs. On the international student side, it's just governments, increasing the number of international students in order to uh, deal with declining education budgets. So yeah, I don't really think they think of it in terms of those kinds of trade offs, but rather it's just a question of sort of priorities, and I think it's also a question of who votes. That the marginal voter, or the median voter, tends to be somebody in their 50s who doesn't, isn't about to have kids, right? So government priorities tend to be elsewhere. But no, I certainly don't think that they're thinking of this in terms of trade offs and going, okay, do we want one more person from abroad versus one baby?
Mm.
I've worked in government. I've never heard that conversation.
I think that they should be trying to encourage people to be having kids if they want to have them, because like I know how frustrating it is for a lot of people who are in a situation where they're just like, I just don't see a way to give my kid a life that I feel like is what I want to be able to give them, so I'd rather not have them. And for people to grow up in Canada and to not be able to afford to have kids when they want to, and the only thing stopping them is like housing costs. It's like a really sad situation that I think that this government should, and all of like any government that comes in next should really think about, like, how do we make that easier for people. I think that people will become much happier citizens if they know that they have these kinds of options and they don't feel stuck.
Well, absolutely. So, I think you've hit on a couple really important things. That one is that societal cohesion, right? People are generally happier when they feel like they have agency over their lives, that they can make the decisions that are best for them, right? Rather than being kind of forced into, okay, I'm never going to be able to have a kid, or I'm never going to be able to own a home, or I'm never going to be able to do the things I want to do. And it's not, again, government deciding that owning is better than renting, or being a parent is better than being a non-parent. Rather, it's, government allowing people to make the choices that are best for them. But the other thing I worry about is brain drain, and particularly in the city of Toronto, right? That folks are who want to start a family are just going to say I can't do it here. So we start losing people. We lose people to Alberta. I think we're going to lose more and more people to Europe and the United States. Who are just going, well, look, I can't. I could try and live in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal, but I just can't make it work. But if I go live in Denver or Austin or Phoenix, I can earn more money. Get a house that costs like half as much,
With a bedroom for each of
and
my kids.
with a bedroom for each of your kids. Exactly. So I really worry about that sort of brain drain effect, because I think people aren't just going to go, okay, well, I really want kids, but I'm not going to do it now. I think they'll just go, okay, well, I really want kids, and instead of doing it in Toronto, I'll go do it in Denver instead.
Thanks so much for watching and listening, and thanks as always to our producer, Meredith Martin.
And if you have any burning thoughts on childcare, or want to send Cara your congratulations, please send us an email to missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.